He's the creator of the Estimative Index, a fertilization method that changed how we think about dosing nutrients in our tank. It's been since 1995. So that's really awesome, Tom. Tom is not just about Estimative Index, though. He's an aquatic botanist, he's an educator, and the mind behind the Barr Report. Outside the aquarium, he's just as passionate about bonsai, horticulture, and collecting manzanita wood, blending science and art in everything he does. Tom, it's a real honor to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Weekend Aquarist.
Thank you. I'm humbled.
Great. So, Tom, let's talk about your, how did you come up with the estimative index? 1995. Tell me about it, please.
At the time, I was doing really large water changes. I had discus, got these big, nice discus from a guy named Dick Ow. And Dick Ow is a pretty famous discus keeper here in the California, USA. And I would go to the local aquarium meetings, and he would have large blue diamond discus that were calls. They had just called them off, and he wanted to keep the nice ones, and he sold the other ones. And I bought up a bunch of them for I think they were like $5. So that's it's very, very cheap.
Yeah, $5 is nothing actually.
For
Yeah.
a large one like that. So I bought up 8 or 9 of them, I think, at the time, and went home. Thought, oh, these things are supposed to be really touchy and all that, and they're just big cichlids, and they eat a lot, and they come up and they're kind of like a dog, it comes up wagging its little tail. And so people had suggested, oh, you should do 30-50% water changes twice a week. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I noticed the plants grew really, really well because of doing those water changes. And I was like, And then I was like, well, a lot of the recommendations are to use these test kits to measure your nutrients and your parts per million. And I'm like, well, why am I doing that if I'm doing these huge water changes? Because I'm removing everything. If I just add a certain amount, and I can do that by volume. And so I was like, well, if I just add, 3/4 of a teaspoon or half a teaspoon, basically 5 mils, to this 90-gallon tank, 3 or 4 times a week, and my dilution levels drop it way back down each time, I can keep a pretty good range, not too low, not too high, and then I don't have to do any testing.
Right.
So I've met nobody in the entire planet that got into aquatic plants just for the sole purpose of testing. Using test kits. Nobody got into it. They don't like it. And most of the people would start off using it thinking that was something that they needed to do and something they needed to learn. That might be true. But most everybody stops. And once they figure out, oh, okay, I've tested. My things are doing fine. I don't need to test. I'm only going to test if there's a problem. And that's a key point. Because then you're only looking at your dependencies, your things that you messed up, and rather than the independence of a good control. And so you should test things that are going right, not wrong. Wrong, it's pretty easy. You've got it figured out. Okay, I've screwed up something. And so if you do the water changes, add the ferts back, that rules out the fertilizers. That's easy to do. Light is pretty stable. If you have more light, you probably need to add more CO2. And a lot of people back in the 90s were not adding enough CO2. And the lighting power started to go way up in the late 90s. People started using power compacts. I had some old metal halides.
Metal halides, they used to heat up the water, Yeah,
so we were punching in probably 3 times, 4 times more light than anybody else. And so I had to add more CO2 to account for that. But I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to use Liebig's law of the minimum. and it's kind of this bucket shape, and each plank is, a nutrient or light or CO2 or water changes, the right temperature, things like that. And so as to get more growth out of that bucket, the higher the water level, the more growth of the plants. And so I increased the nutrients nicely. So those were non-limiting at that point. I knew
Yes.
that based on the growth of the plants. And so I needed to add more CO2 if I had that higher light. And so I did. And I didn't even really check it. I just slowly adjusted it little by little and watched the tank until I got good growth. And I ignored the algae, everything else. I just watched the new growth on the tips of the plant. And I did it slowly and methodically. You just do it a little quarter-inch, just a little tiny, I don't know, maybe 1/16th, 1/32nd of a turn on the needle valve for the CO2. And then once that was set, everything grew great. And I was adding plenty of nutrients, plenty of CO2, plenty of light, and everything grew like mad. Well, then I started growing a lot of nice plants. I'd take them down to the local aquarium society, and we would sell them. And I was selling $200 or $300 a plants every month, and I was bringing in all these plants that all these other folks were having trouble growing. And even the people who were really specialized, spent a lot of money, had a lot of background knowledge, and they wanted to come over to my house and see what I'm doing. And so they did, and then they measured the phosphate. And the rest of them had been trying to keep the phosphate down. That was the big thing back in the mid-90s, was to limit your phosphate. And they were like, I can't believe this. You have all this phosphate, but you don't have any algae. And I go, well, the plants are growing. You see that there's no algae. Well, what do you think about that hypothesis? And there was a guy named Paul Sears and Kevin Colin who proposed this real nice thing it's still on the crib, actually. An old website. Eric Olson put that up many years ago. And it talks about this whole hypothesis of limiting phosphate. You still need some. You're not trying to eliminate it, but you need just this low residual amount, about 0.2 parts per million. Well, my tank had like 1.3 parts per million of phosphate, and everything was growing good, better than all the other people in the Bay Area. And so they knew something was up. And so they brought in test kits, and we measured the tank. Then we got, the tank's pretty high. Well, let's go measure your tap water. And the tap water had it in too, about the same amount, because I'm doing these big water changes frequently. And that whole sort of dosing approach, and without doing the test kits and just doing water changes, very simple, easy to do, easy to reset your tank and get everything going. Right. The other thing it did was it falsified the claim, that excess phosphate causes algae. And that was a big thing. And it was a heresy, blasphemy. You are a cow killer. However you want to, express that sort of, almost a religious belief. And but in science, we don't deal with beliefs. We deal with, what are the facts here?
Yeah.
And so I ended up talking to the guy, Paul Sears. I had just had a high school, education at that point, and he had a PhD in organic chemistry. He's a smart guy, and probably one of the smartest people I've met in the hobby still to this day. He goes, "You got me. You falsified it, and all it takes is one experiment." Then others did it. And then the local club, we formed the SF BAPS Aquarium Club, aquatic plant club in the Bay Area back in '96. And there was quite a few, a real wide group that came together to form that. Very different people. and all of them added the phosphate and excess potassium, all that other stuff, and we all had the same results. So with real different tap waters. And so San Francisco's tap water comes out of the Sierra Nevada. It's a granite snow melt, and so it's very, very pure water. My water had a mix of local supply, and then they added a little bit of phosphate for the pipes. And
Right.
so another place, sort of about halfway in between, was the East Bay, Oakland area, and they had a little bit of phosphate in it. So we had everything. And then we had some real hard water down in San Jose, and that was coming out of the Delta. And they mixed it with some other sources, and so we were able to test look at the water treatment processes
Mm, mm,
around,
mm.
and then measure those. And then about that time, I got certified as a water treatment plant operator around '95, and I was going to go into that as far as a career. It would
Okay.
have been good, but I didn't. I went back to school and finished my college and all that. I got more interested in falsification and things like that. So while phosphate isn't the cause of algae, we still quite haven't figured out all the details about algae why algae is caused in planted tanks. There's a few things that we've narrowed it down to, but it's still not quite. We don't have a fully understandable working theory for why algae grows in planted tanks sometimes.
But
Um,
I do have a question over there before we kind of move a little ahead on that. So the whole concept is you don't limit your nutrients. Okay, no
mhm.
limitations on nutrients. You add your macros one day, you add your micros, limited quantity. Okay, and
You
then
can,
you
yeah.
alternate that, and once a week you do a massive water change, about 50%, and that should keep your nutrients in check and balance it so that the plants have enough time to absorb it, and therefore also at the same time limiting the algae growth, because if the plants are taking up all the nutrients or maximum, so algae is not getting it.
Yep.
What happens if hobbies being hobbyists, if they kind of take a break for 1 or 2 weeks and don't do those water changes?
So that happens a lot, and I've done it. Pretty much everybody's done it. We have life happens, and we're
Right.
human, and we put things off. We procrastinate. We do all kinds of we have our own habits. Plus, just if we go on vacation,
Right.
things like that. So nothing really. It just builds up a little bit more, and you're like, wow, my nitrate's at 40 and phosphate's at 10, and potassium's up around 50, and tank's growing good. It might be growing a little too good, so maybe I'm going to back off that
Mm.
nutrient level, that high nutrient level, and drop it down. The other thing is just like with the CO2, where you just slowly adjust it up. You can do the same thing with that little teaspoon. I'm going to add a little bit
Mm.
less each week until you start
Mm.
seeing a little bit of limitation, a little bit of slowdown in the growth,
Mm.
and then that's probably the right range for your nutrients. So you can do the visual thing rather than the
Mm.
test kit thing. You can look at the plants
Right.
carefully.
Right.
I think that's a key thing for a lot of people, especially as you get more experienced and all that. You can just look and sort of tell, and I need to add a little bit of phosphate, or I need to add a little bit of this or that. That takes time and skill, and new people don't have that luxury. And so this
Or
is just a way to
patience.
kind of get there with doing lots of water changes and
Right.
adding plenty of nutrients. So you know what that looks like. And then you can back off or add different plants that grow slower or use less light, things like that. So it's not so much about what causes algae or we're limiting algae.
Mm.
It's the plants define the system, not the other way around from the bottom
Mm.
up with nutrients.
Mm.
It's the
Mm.
plants. And the plants,
Mm.
they need a lot more nutrients than the algae do. And there's plenty.
Right.
If that was true, we could just do water changes and remove all this stuff, and then the algae would go away, right? And
Right.
that
That
doesn't
doesn't
work. You got to
happen.
add the nutrients
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah. One of the things that, and you did touch upon it, that new hobbyists, low on the patience scale. So they don't have that much patience.
No,
and
none.
working with plants requires, or plants teach you patience. It's not that you require patience. Plants, actually growing plants, will teach you patience, because you want them to grow in a particular way, and they will grow that, but and in their own time scale, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? What has, so many decades of thing, if you were to kind of just share some of your insights as to how things have progressed, what all have you learned? I mean, I go through the Barr Report site and all, and I see so many discussions going on, so many thousands and thousands of hobbies over there, exchanging
Mhm.
notes and all. But everything has started with you, Tom. So do share a little bit about your insights also.
Yeah. So with me, a lot of what, the EI thing isn't mine. That whole idea really isn't particularly mine. People have been doing water changes and flushing it, and then adding food or whatever, and then flushing it. That wasn't my idea. That was the discus folks, uh, and then adding the fertilizers. That was Paul and Kevin and George Booth and quite a few other people in the American, mostly American, AGA, Aquatic Gardeners Association back then. And we were all in a group talking, and they were the ones that gave me the idea to add the fertilizers, the specific ones, potassium nitrate, monobasic potassium phosphate, those things. And so it wasn't really my idea necessarily, but
Mhm.
the process of sort of figuring it out and putting it together, and then assuming that phosphate was not a limiting factor. Otherwise, it's probably about, I'd say, 90% that poor man's dupling drop thing that Kevin and Paul had come up with. It's not,
Right,
I mean, I shouldn't take credit for most of what, almost 90% at least, that they did. I just
right,
falsified one thing and then put the rest together, and then added the water
sure.
changes that somebody else had talked about. And then the phosphate thing, I didn't even know. Steve Dixon, one of the guys from the local club, came over, measured, had real nice test kits, talked about using controls, standards, which I knew about already. I hadn't had chemistry yet at the college level, but I knew about it already. You should use a control and then also a blank to make sure that your reference solution, so your test method is good. And so you'd use a 5, a 25, and a 50 part per million nitrate solution to make
Mhm.
your test kits. And so we didn't have dosing calculators at the time, so we had to do it the old-fashioned way with chemistry. So I learned that myself without going to a chemistry class per se. I'd had chemistry in high school, but I just applied what I learned there and did it myself. And then plus I was a water treatment plant operator. You kind of have to have some mental acuity to do that in aquariums too. So a lot of the stuff I'd learned from other people. I mean, it wasn't my necessarily, and so I might have synthesized things together and just made it really simple. The poor man's dupla drops, the hypothesis for phosphate limitation, that was pretty wordy and
Mhm.
long, and a lot of chemistry in there. And I kind of reduced it down just to making like cookies or something like that. Add 1 teaspoon of this, half teaspoon of that, and then you do a big water change. We signed up for water changes. Most people
Mm.
didn't sign up for testing, 4, 6 different parameters every week or something like that. So the water change thing is good. Got people on it. There became a sort of a backlash to the water change thing a few years later. Somebody sort of co-opted the old original poor man's dupla drops, and they called it, poor PPMD or PPM or something like perpetual preservation method. PPM. There we go. And they co-opted it, and they claimed it was all their own and stuff like that. And eventually, a couple of them said, "Yeah, we got it a lot from the same source you did." And their idea was just to sort of, it's a good idea, I mean, or noble one, I guess I would say, to minimize water changes and be lazy. So and then use the test kits, and but it got kind of a little bit weird. A lot of wasn't as consistent either. I can do it. I mean, myself, I've done it. I can do it better than they can actually. The guy who came up with it. So that was a little bit of a backlash, and then daily dosing became kind of more of a thing because people remember it and do it more. But most of the liquids and fertilizers sold today are from that whole conversation that I and other people had back then in the 90s. And it's easy to make, but the reason why I never invented or came up with a liquid line, I had plenty of offers, is I didn't want to do that. And I wanted to help people, and to do it cheaply and consistently. You don't need a brand name, which rarely labels the stuff. You need the base powders. Learn a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
chemistry, learn a bit of little observation, and you'll do much better than
And
just buying this stuff, which is mostly just water with a tiny bit of fertilizer in it. It doesn't matter the brand or all that.
if you were to advise or give a suggestion to a new, planted tank hobbyist, and he wants to learn, about this, what would you say? Where do you start with? Because you said, okay, learn a little bit of chemistry, and can you just elaborate a little bit about that for our viewers?
One of the probably the biggest concepts I think that within the hobby, that it's sort of a scientific law. It's not an opinion. It's not an alternative fact or pseudoscience or anything else. It's an agricultural law, and that's
Hmm.
the law of the minimum by Liebig. And that's probably a good one to sort of think about, because you're thinking about all the things that help grow that plant, all the different facets of the nitrate, phosphate, potassium, iron, all the trace metals, the CO2, the light, the temperature, the water changes, things like that. New people, the water changes will mitigate a lot of their mistakes, and me too. And so if I screw something up, I'm going to do a water change first. And when I do it, I do a big water change usually, maybe 80%, and I expose probably most of the plants to air. And plants are kind of like a sponge, like a porous sponge, and their tissues are not a lot of carbon in there like terrestrial plants or trees. It's mostly just this herbaceous, spongy material. So when you expose it to the air, these plants lay down and they're sucking in all this CO2 because there's no water barrier to slow it down. So
Right,
it's 10,000
right,
times faster.
right.
So the plants absorb all that. And so I let the water stay low for, I don't know, 5, 15 minutes, something like that, until they start sort of slightly drying out. Maybe I'll mist it in between or splash the water up that's still in the tank on the plants to wet them a little bit so they don't dry out, actually desiccate.
Right.
And then I fill the tank back up, and then you see this gorgeous, pearling, extremely intense pearling.
Wow.
And a lot of people say, well, that's just the air, the water degassing. That part's true. But the other part is the plant just got a good shock of plenty of CO2, lots of it, more than it's ever had. And so at that point, you can definitely tell the difference. And you can measure oxygen levels too, as a sort of if you have more photosynthesis, you have more oxygen in the water. So you can measure that also. But the effects are pretty dramatic with the water change. And if your CO2 is off or anything, and you expose that plant to plenty of CO2, 2 or 3 times a week, you're going to get a pretty good effect, and it'll mitigate that poor CO2 level.
Is that something that you would recommend for people who, for various reasons, maybe budgetary constraints and all, do not have a CO2 setup, but want to keep plants? And they usually end up, with the anubias and the ferns and all, the so-called low CO2 plants.
Hmm.
But would you, if they want to kind of just go the whole hog, and you know, that is a beautiful thought over there, because it just, I could just relate to it, because when you lower that, and I've observed it, when you lower the water column completely and expose the plants,
Hmm.
and then when you fill it up, in the next 2 3 hours you are going to see a hell lot of pearling than you have ever seen before. The
Yep.
only thing I did not connect before, and this is a learning for me also after so many decades in the hobby, is that you have exposed them to so much more right now, that they have absorbed all of it.
Yep.
And they're just kind of bursting with energy right now.
So
But is that something that you would recommend for people who are keeping, let's say, so-called non-CO2
oh
tanks,
yeah, same thing. Same
aquarium?
thing. I always do a lot of water changes in the start. I do like 2 or 3 a week when I start a new tank. Doesn't matter if it's non-CO2 tank, which I do, or a CO2 enriched tank. They both tanks really benefit from that. And that initial 1 to 2 month period is key for establishing bacteria in the sediment, establishing roots, and getting it off to a good start, so the plants aren't really sort of trying to dominate with the algae and other things. And so
Mm-hmm.
you give them priority and care, and it's a lot of work that first month or two. But after that, it settles in, and then you can reduce and go down to once a week or whatever. I stuck with every other twice a week for a long time, about 12 years, and it worked very, very well. I almost never had any issues at all. Once a week did pretty well also. So, but twice a week is, non CO2. If you do it, you can do it daily. If it's a small tank, you just scoop in, toss it out, let it set, go do something, grab a bucket of water and pour it back in. If it's a small little tank, and see this really, really well without much labor or work. So you can test it if you wanted at a small scale, and then you could try to scale it up and see. With non CO2, the plants they have the enzyme rubisco, and it's the enzyme that catches the CO2 gas and brings it into the Calvin cycle in the plants.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the most prevalent protein enzyme or protein. They're both the same. Well, all enzymes are proteins, but all proteins are not enzymes. There we go. But it's the most prevalent enzyme on the planet. It's the most common one. And plants, they spend a lot of energy making that particular enzyme, and they need a lot of it if the CO2 is really low. If the CO2 is high, they're smart. Plants don't make as much. And so the ones with the CO2 injection don't need to spend all their resources on that. They can spend it on gathering light. So you actually need less light with CO2 than you would with non-CO2. You need a little bit more light as if you're going on the minimum side of the light scale. So with non-CO2, these plants have a lot more rubisco. And so as soon as you expose them, all those enzymes are saturated pretty quick. They put it in the Calvin cycle. The light cycle comes on. And you start kicking off a lot of NADPH and ATPs from that, as far as metabolism, as far as energy, reducing power. And so you give a lot of oxygen off from that. And those are really tightly linked. The light dependent, and then the light independent processes within a chloroplast. And so that's one reason why I think you see even more of that effect with a non-CO2 tank than you would with a CO2 enriched tank. The big water changes and letting it sort of expose itself. Eventually, you can get to the point, though, in both CO2 or non-CO2, where you don't have to do any water changes at all for months if you wanted. As long as you top it off for evaporation loss, you can go many months and not have any algae or any issues, and go in and trim and do your work. They're a little more touchy if you pull a bunch of plants up, and that's true for all planted tanks. If you uproot a lot of plants suddenly, say more than 50%, 30%, you usually run into problems or a little bit of algae or something typically. But that's that link between the plants dominating, and if you remove so much plants and they're not dominating anymore, and the water changes mitigate that. So if you do a water change before and then after you do the trimming and the uprooting, then you don't get it. Then you have that problem. And if you do maybe another water change 2 or 3 days later, the plants have enough time to reestablish in an already established tank. But uprooting just maybe 1/3 1 week, 1/3 the next, 1/3. That works much better than trying to rip everything out and then replanting everything.
Yeah, they probably go into a state of shock also, because it's such an enclosed space, and then too much chaos suddenly.
Well, the completely contained, controlled ecosystem, that's what it is. And,
Correct.
there's management issues there, and there's a lot of ways to screw things up. And this is true just in horticulture, too. So, say I wanted to grow saffron, and I did it in a hydroponic system, and we had these vertical columns, and then we, have the people, they don't have to bend over to get the flower. You can just get it right there. That takes a lot of energy. They have these, indoor hydroponics for microgreens, small lettuces, and mostly brassicas. Those things are similar because we have you have complete control over the environment. And if you add too much light, not enough CO2, too many nutrients, fish, pest issues. Fish are pest and too many plants. They like to eat them, or they just like to clean them, and it hurts the plant. Things like that really make a big difference, and it's a lot of responsibility and things to think about. And the water change thing really makes it a lot easier for everybody, and especially new people coming in. And then, if you're a little lazier, if you want to try and focus in, get a little better, more precise, not add as much waste. So my thing is, for the water change, water's pretty cheap, relatively speaking, unless you're having to go down to the creek and carry it up. But if you have indoor plumbing, it's pretty cheap, and you can just the wastewater is what I'm a wastewater treatment plant operator too. Is those that water goes out into the yard where my landscaping plants are, and the waters those. In the winter, we get plenty of rain here. Doesn't really matter, but in the summer, fall, and spring, I always put it out on the garden. And I've got 2 large, probably 1,000 liters worth or 2,000 liters worth of cisterns right outside my back, and the water goes right into there. And then I put a few fish in there, and then they eat the mosquito larvae and other things that drop into that tank. It's open air. It's on the north side, so I don't get much sunlight on there and under the eaves. And then you can use that to water your garden, your vegetables, or bonsai, and that kind of stuff.
So before we move on to the other topics, what are your thoughts on the lean dosing, philosophy? So here we are talking about non-limiting nutrients. On the other side, you have the lean dosing philosophy. So, uh, your thoughts on that?
So you just add, the thing about aquatic plants is most of them are weeds. They grow really fast, and it gets tiring trimming all the stem plants. This is mostly a stem plant person issue. It's not the anubis; they're not worried about that, or crypts, or ferns and grasses. We don't even care about that. But it's mostly the highlight stem plants. So these people put all this highlight on there, and the light is really the kind of the gas pedal. And you tell them not to add so much light, and they go, no, it's a highlight disease, I've called it in the past. And it's the assumption that more light is somehow better, and it's not really true in that area. A lot of these plants will grow quite nicely at lower light, and a lot of people don't believe it, and it's a belief thing, and it's a sort of our own sort of bias, I guess, in some ways. I had it too. I had the big metal halides, these 150, 175 watts of power over this, little area. And so I know it well. I've used more light than most people, and I've gone way beyond any of the folks here, at least in aquariums. Outdoor lighting is quite intense. And horticultural lighting or horticulture growth for outdoor production of aquatic plants. I know the light levels in there as well. So lean dosing takes sort of this idea that we have plenty of light, plenty of CO2, usually high light. They almost always have high light. it's the highlight disease issue. But they add all this stuff, and then they limit the nutrients lower. And this works fairly well, but it's a kind of a narrow range. Mm-hmm. And the EI is a much, much larger range. It keeps going out further. The narrow range worked quite well, though. And for folks who are more consistent with their dosing. And it'll limit plants a little bit, but you're in between this. It's sort of a Goldilocks zone. Too much, well, then you don't get the red colors. Too little, then you stunt the plants. There's everybody's done this at least a few times, just either by mistake or by trying and then failing to manage the system. So EI is a much larger target to hit for most people. Or as a general rule, if you wanted to do that. A lot of people are very enamored. They want to believe that this is, somehow a better system. I guess it is for folks who want to add, real consistent dosing. And most of the bottles, liquids, they sort of espouse this idea mostly because they think if you add too much, you're going to get algae. And that's not true. So if they were smart, they would espouse EI, because then you get to waste all this stuff and you're dumping all this stuff in, then you buy more. I'm like, you guys got it the other way around. But, but people love the red plants and the highlight. It's right. Like they're a moth flying to the candle, and they just, if they have experience and time and are consistent, it works. There's no doubt about it. You can't deny that. I've done it. I can do it. And it's not hard for me. But for other folks, it can be fairly difficult. So the other end of it, so I've gone EI sort of the high end. Then there's sort of this middle range. Then the lean dosing. What if we go another step down that way? No dosing. Maybe no just dosing, a little bit of little fish waste. Does that work? And the answer is yes. And so if you have, especially if you have like an ADA soil, something like that, these clay-based soils, then you can get away with it because the plants still have some nutrients from that, everything except probably nitrogen. And if you have ample fish load, you can get away with it and not do dosing maybe once every week, 2 weeks, month, maybe even all the way out to 3 or 4 months. And I've done it I've done it for 10 years 15 years out in the garage. So I've done that because it's the purpose of that is just to leave the plants there and keep them as a repository and as a quarantine tanks. And so I don't I've tried dosing, done a few things and tests and experiments on it to see if ramping it up helped more, or if I did it once a week or twice a week, did it help? The answer was, well, a little bit, but then I needed to do probably more water changes, needed to tend it more care. And for me, it's not a thing out there. And I'm more likely to leave it alone and see what happens if I do a test out there. If I do something inside, I'm more likely just to fiddle with it and do all these other dependent things that'll help the tank more. And so I'm not quite sure about my idea. Out in the garage, I am, because I've done it for 3 to 6 months without any dosing except for fish food. And it's not a lot of fish. It's just mostly shrimp and maybe a few algae eaters, and that's it. And that works too. So I get good color. I get nice structure off my Ammonia pedicellata and the Ammonia crassicalis gracilis, which is a very red form of the Ammonia gracilis. Very few people can grow that, and I have no problem though. There's a few other plants. Bucephalandras look beautiful in that tank without any nutrients. The white anubis, the snow white anubis, that grows really, really, really well at low nutrients and very, very white. And if you add more nitrogen, it turns greener. And the other plants, the red plants, you add more nitrogen, it turns greener, sort of pale. It doesn't have that real intense red color that a lot of people want. And so my question was, well, why is this one little narrow special range so great versus a nothing? Mm-hmm. Well, they're selling fertilizers, so they gotta sell something. So all your fertilizer makers are gonna mention that, because they need to sell some. They're a little scared to go too far one way and go this way. Well, you're not selling anything, so that's why a lot of the advice is right in that narrow range. Right. It's not that it can't be done, because you can go all the way out there if you have a rich sediment, and you can go all the way to the other side, and they all work. But the rate of growth is a big factor. So if you have more, you're going to have more growth. If you're going to have less, you're going to have less growth. So it depends on you.
So Tom, you're also into aquascaping, and
very much so.
Tell us a little bit about that as well, and also I'm going to add it up to another question, is that you've been personally collecting and supplying manzanita wood from California, so touch upon that as well. You've got an unfair advantage over there being in California.